very emotional process for them. I met with them before any evidence started to tell them what the process was going to be, and I met with them today after their decision. And I can tell you just how emotional and how draining it was for each and every one of them. So to suggest anywhere, anyone suggesting that somehow, you know, it's just not a full and fair process. It's just unfair to these people. They pour their hearts and souls into this. Yes, ma'am. Go right next to you after that.
I'll hand it right over, I promise. Can you tell us anything more about the grand jury? We've heard just some very basic demographics, mainly just race and sex. Can you tell us any more, the basic ages, and maybe perhaps which way those folks voted?
No, I mean, I really can't. That was the information that the judge released and allowed to be released on the demographics of or the makeup of the grand jury. What I can tell you, and probably not speaking too far out of line, is that, you know, when any judge picks a grand jury, they're looking for a cross-section of St. Louis County. And I will say that almost any demographic category you can come up with is going to be represented on that grand jury. The various ages, income, where they live, how they live, retired, not retired, still working, blue collar, professional. Almost anything you can think of is going to be on that grand jury. And they tend to be that way across the across the spectrum. You know, we have 3 a year. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, were there any African American witnesses who testified that Michael Brown was coming towards the officer when Brown was shot?
Yes. All the ones that I mentioned specifically were all African Americans. That the one who indicated that he came at him in a full charge, and that as Officer Wilson fired shots at him, Mr. Brown stopped, and Officer Wilson stopped shooting, and as Mr. Brown started charging at him again, those are his words, his testimony, Mr. Wilson started shooting again. And so the others who had very consistent stories, not just with each other, or not just their stories or their testimony throughout, but they were consistent with the others, several others, they're all African American. Yes, sir.
I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Officer Wilson's testimony and perhaps his status tonight.
Well, I have no idea what his status is, but his testimony was, again, it's in the packet that'll be released, but his testimony, and you know, these are questions a lot that were asked by the grand jurors, as you know, questioning him and challenging him on why he didn't use lesser force, why he didn't run away. And rather than get into the specifics of it, I will say that he did testify, of course, that he was sitting in the car and was punched by Mr. Brown. I think all of that information from his version out there, or is out there. I specifically didn't do that because, in any case, the target or the suspect is you know, has the most interest in the case, and so we don't put a whole lot of stock. We'd love to hear from him, but don't put a whole lot of stock, or can't rely solely upon that testimony. So, yes, sir. The blue shirt.
You mentioned that there's video of the final 10 shots. Would that be released with the rest of the evidence that you're releasing tonight?
I mean, I just assume that microphone's going somewhere, but it's not here.
You mentioned that there was a video of the final 10 shots. Would that be released with the rest of the evidence?
No, there's not video, there's audio. He was on a video chat in the background, but yes, that should be in the packet. If it's not, we will get the audio out. Yes, sir. Kevin?
I want to ask you a question. Imagining what the people who are protesting tonight might say, they'd say, look, this jury had 9 whites on it and 3 blacks. They'd say, you have a reputation, right or wrong, of being pro-police. What do you say to somebody who might be out there who thinks it wasn't justice? How do you boil it down? Why is this justice, this outcome?
You know, it's hard to boil down everything. That's why I said it has to be based upon all the information that's available. You could certainly take out a witness here, a witness there, and come to a different conclusion. But I think everyone has to look. They'll have the ability to look at every bit of evidence and information that was put on and all the testimony, and can do that. And some, I understand some people have made up their minds both ways and are not going to change. And so there isn't a whole lot I can do. What I would urge them to do is express those feelings, express them in a constructive way, and try to make some changes so that nothing like this ever happens again. Yes, ma'am.
You just explained that we need to work on issues so that this kind of thing won't ever happen again. Can you explain what are some of those fixes that need to happen, and are any of them including whether or not police should shoot somebody whose hands are maybe at their stomach, maybe at their sides, or maybe up in the air, and they are unarmed?
Well, you know, it's difficult to answer. In fact, it's impossible to answer questions like that because there are so many variables that play into every case, and so there's just no real way to answer a question like that. And so you have to look at every bit of information in every case that comes in. The idea, I hope, is to avoid ever being in that situation. Yes, sir.
So McCulloch, you're somebody who's had his record questioned by many members of the community with cases that have happened in the past. So, I mean, how do you feel making this, announcing this decision, and what message do you think it sends to the community that says that they have had numerous members of that community, young, predominantly black males, killed by police with impunity? What kind of message do you think this decision says to them?
Well, a much better message than what you're sending, that young men being killed with impunity. They're not being killed with impunity. We look at every case that comes through, and whether they're young black men or young white men. We've had, you know, young white men who tragically have been killed by police officers in situations. And we look at each and every one of those and hopefully learn from each and every one of those how to avoid being in that situation in the future, whether it's a justified shooting. So I think that's what has to go. And I think that, you know, the people in the community, they need to make their voices heard, and they need to address those issues so that we get those issues so that we're never in this position again. Yes, sir.
I think people looking at this from around the country are going to be struck by the fact that there is not a single law in the state of Missouri that protects and values the life of this young man who unquestionably was shot and killed dead. There's no dispute about that by the police officer. What do you say to people who wonder, is there something wrong with the laws here that allows this to happen, that after this happens says,
about all that we can. That's not all of it, but that's what we should be doing, and that's where this needs to go from here. So, yes, sir.
Mr. McCulloch, you've been accused by some of passing the buck by simply standing back and putting all this evidence in front of the grand jury rather than taking a stand. Isn't that what you were elected to do? Shouldn't you have taken a stand on this case?
Usually you have to understand, and part of that system, there isn't anyone in the system, as part of the checks and balances we have in this system, is that no one office, no one individual has the ultimate or absolute authority. If charges were filed in this case, as they're filed in other cases, the case would still go to a preliminary hearing or to the grand jury. There still has to be a probable cause determination. No one can just file a charge and go directly to a jury trial. That just cannot happen. And we have an obligation to present the evidence. I don't know how anyone can say it was, you know, we're passing the buck by gathering all this information and evidence and meeting with the grand jury. It's something we do on a weekly basis. We do it day in and day out, week in and week out. So it's certainly not passing the buck. Yes, ma'am, back in the corner there.
Hi, can you give the specific vote breakdown, and what's the possibility of federal charges? Are those still a possibility and outstanding?
You know, I can't give you a vote breakdown because I don't know that, and neither I can't ask, nor can the grand jurors reveal that. The federal investigation is still ongoing. They have all the information, all the evidence that we have. They had it, you know, as we got it. When we finished a day's worth of grand jury testimony, within a day or two, that was in the hands of the Department of Justice. When they did an interview, within hours, that was in the hands of the Department of Justice. So they will conduct their investigation as we did. They're looking at different types of laws, obviously, and different violations. So, but when we'll complete that, I have no insight into that. So, yes, sir.
Did any witnesses refuse to testify, and if so, how was that handled?
I didn't hear the last part.
if any witnesses refused to testify, how was that handled?
There were a few witnesses who were not brought in, and they were witnesses who, you know, one didn't make a statement. There were a couple who just disappeared. We spent a lot of time searching for them, and with the assistance of the FBI, but we're unable to locate a couple of them. So none of the information, even though in one case I think we had a statement from the witness, it wasn't presented to the grand jury. I think there were a couple of them. Yes, ma'am. I think we got time for a couple more here.
You cite Officer Wilson's description of Brown's movement towards him as a charge. Was there any other evidence that might have led the grand jury to conclude Wilson had reasonable cause for the use of deadly force?
But again, I think you have to have, I'm not privy to the deliberations, and so I can't say what they saw as highly significant or not, but they had all the information, and they were charged with, and they were told that here's what the law requires, that you consider all of the evidence and the information. And so it's not just, as in most cases, it is not just one bit of evidence that says, all right, that's it, that's all we need to hear. It's everything that is presented, which is why we wanted to make this as complete and thorough as possible. Yes, ma'am.
What justification are you going to be using to release the grand jury evidence? I know there's been some dispute as to whether a court order is going to be needed to present what it is you're saying you're able to present tonight.
You know, I won't bore you with all the legal details and technicalities of it, but essentially it is now a closed investigation, which makes it an open file. It's a lot more complicated and complex than that, but essentially that's how the Sunshine Law operates. When it's a closed investigation, when it's a closed case, it's an open file. And so that's the basis, and we're following the Sunshine Law. Well, there's no specific request for it. I assume there would be a request, but I thought it was important in the first place to release the information. So, yes, ma'am.
Bob, obviously many are not happy with this decision tonight, especially the family of Michael Brown. If they are watching, what would you want to say to them this evening?
Well, you know, as I said at the very outset, you know, my heart goes out to them. And regardless of the circumstances, they lost a young man, they lost a young life, and I've said.
3, 2, 1, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Should I be hearing something? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Should I be hearing something? 7, 6.
All right, it looks like they're having some technical difficulties there. So just to recap, Officer Darren Wilson will not be indicted in the shooting death of 18-year-old Michael Brown. Now, we heard it all from the prosecutor himself. He spoke for over a half hour on the issue. And John Hook, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
On this very eventful night. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that people outside in Ferguson are going to be happy about this one bit. Probably much of America will not be happy about it. Certainly in the African American community, they're not going to be happy about it, because there's certainly a problem with policing in the African American community. There's no doubt about that. It's undeniable, and it's an issue. But the prosecutor is trying to say that he laid it all out there and the grand jury decided, and he's kind of, it gives him political cover, and he's saying the facts just didn't support, and the physical facts did not support bringing charges against the officer Darren Wilson.
All right, now I'm hearing that President Obama is just about to address the Ferguson decision. We're going to get that video any moment now. We'll share that with you as soon as we get that in.
That'll be interesting, because even the Justice Department at this point on the federal charges in this case, they have already indicated through back channels that with what they have, they may not go there as well. So you've got the St. Louis County prosecutor saying no, it just doesn't amount to a cold-blooded killing that it was portrayed early on. And now the Justice Department has really backed away from going there as well. So.
Right. And I think it's interesting to note how much the prosecutor emphasized the physical. He kept using the word physical and scientific evidence to really like hammer his point home.
Right.
In terms of the grand jury's decision.
And using that, dovetailing that with what he called credibility,
that was the thing.
And that all of that evidence in total, and again, he doesn't make the call. When it goes to a grand jury, it's that group of 12, and you need 9 yes votes to hand up an indictment. So, and an indictment simply would have been reason to go on to a trial. This wasn't the end anyway. There would have been a trial had there been enough evidence there, but what he's saying is this jury
doesn't even want to go to trial.
Doesn't want to go to trial. And all they would need would be 9 votes to say no, and it's over.
My Twitter timeline is blowing up with people just, outraged. I don't know if that's the right word, but just, I think...
And I understand that.
People are making that point, if you go to court, then you can make so if you go to trial, then you can
This
make
was unusual in that respect. Right. That usually the prosecution, generally what happens is they issue a very narrow recitation of the facts, and they kind of tailor it to get reason to go on to a trial. In this case, and I think because he felt that there wasn't enough evidence to win a trial, he said, "Look, I'm going to lay this all out and let them decide."
Right, and again, like we've already mentioned before, he emphasized physical and scientific evidence. Also wanted to say that you don't make decisions based on public outcry or for political reasons.
That's right. That will not make people who wanted, for lack of a better term, they wanted a pound of flesh out of this officer for what happened to Michael Brown. They're not going to be happy with this.
Right, and he didn't. There's a reason he spoke for over a half an hour. Those words that were used were very deliberate. I feel like he wanted to address every single, area of gray.
Remember when we went on tonight, we talked about how we'll learn a lot more if there is not an indictment handed up from this grand jury. We will, because all of this will be laid out in black and white